In the 1980s, the richest 10% of Americans owned about 34% of the country's wealth. Today, they own over 60%. At the same time, the bottom half of America barely owns anything. So what changed during that period? Why is over half of the country's wealth so concentrated among a small group of people? Did rich people suddenly start working twice as hard? Did everyone else stop trying? Or is something deeper happening inside the financial system itself? Because over the last 40 years, we didn't just see inequality grow. We built a system that systematically pushes money upwards towards asset owners every single time there's a crisis. And it's created an environment that has allowed a small group of people to become insanely wealthy while not doing much else for a majority of Americans. And to really understand how we got here, we have to start with an idea from the 1700s that explains a lot of what's happening today. It comes from Richard Cantillon, an economist who figured something out almost 300 years ago. When new money enters an economy, the people who get it first benefit the most, while everyone else pays the price of inflation later. Basically, what that means is when the Federal Reserve injects billions or trillions of dollars into the economy, we all know that eventually it's going to cause inflation. But whoever receives that new money first actually has an opportunity where they can buy a bunch of stuff before inflation can start to creep in. And the people who get the money last, they just face higher prices. And here's what that actually looks like in real life, because I know all of this sounds a bit confusing. Say the Fed prints $1 trillion and they inject it into the economy through banks. Those banks don't just sit on it. They use it to buy stocks, real estate, and bonds at today's prices. So with all this new money entering markets, you start to see asset prices going up. You start seeing stocks go up, homes getting more expensive, bonds start to rally. And the people who already own those assets, mostly wealthy investors, they see their net worth explode. But regular people, like most middle-class Americans, they don't own much stock. They don't own rental properties. Or even if they do, it's very small. And by the time any of that new money reaches people's wages, if it ever does, prices have already moved higher. So now workers are paying more for rent, they're paying more for groceries, more for gas and energy, but their paychecks, they haven't caught up. That's the Cantillon effect. The first receivers of new money win. Everyone else just gets inflation. And this isn't just some abstract theory, this is exactly what happened during COVID. The response from the Federal Reserve during COVID was the largest monetary intervention in history. They created about $4.5 trillion through quantitative easing by buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities from banks. That money went straight to financial institutions. And those institutions, they didn't just sit on the money, they used it to buy assets. Now, compare that to what most households got during that time. Direct stimulus checks totaled about $400 billion. So more than 10 times as much money was injected at the top of the system as opposed to the bottom. And the results were exactly what the Cantillon effect predicts. If you owned assets, you did great. If you owned stocks, your portfolio exploded. The S&P 500 gained over 100% from the March 2020 lows to the 2021 peak. And if you owned real estate, your home value surged. In a lot of markets, prices jumped around 40%. And even if you owned bonds, falling interest rates pushed bond prices higher. So all of this new money meant that asset owners won. But if you were a wage earner, yes, you got some stimulus checks, but you watched the price of your rent go up, you saw food getting more expensive, gas getting more expensive, literally everything getting more expensive, and inflation hit 9% in 2022, the highest it's ever hit in 40 years. And that hurts people living paycheck to paycheck the most because they spend a much larger share of their income on basic necessities. Meanwhile, the wealthy, they saw their net worth skyrocket. This is the modern Cantillon effect in action. New money flows into the financial systems at the top, you start to see asset prices rise, and everyone else just gets inflation. And that's how massive wealth gaps get created, and they become a consequence of how the system works. There are also massive tax advantages wealthy people are able to take advantage of, whereas most Americans, they have a very fixed or linear type of income, so they can't really take advantage of these systems. Let's talk about capital gains for a second. If you work for a living, your income gets taxed as wages, and the top marginal rate is about 37%. But if you make money from investments like stocks, real estate, or businesses, that's taxed as capital gains, and the top rate there is 20%, plus like a 3.8% surtax on high earners. So roughly 23.8% is like your top tax bracket. Now compare that to 37% on wages. Already there's a massive advantage for the wealthy, but it gets even better because with investments, you don't pay taxes until you sell. If your stocks go up in value, you owe nothing while they're rising. That's called deferral, and it creates three huge advantages. First is compounding on untaxed money. If you earn $100,000 normally, you might pay 20 to 30K in taxes. But if your portfolio gains $100,000, you don't pay anything because it's unrealized, so that same 20 to 30K, it stays invested and it earns returns, and those returns compound year after year. The second advantage is timing control. You decide when to sell any of your assets to pay taxes, and maybe you decide to sell in a year when your income is lower. Maybe you decide to sell when you have losses to offset those gains. Or maybe you decide to sell when tax rates change and become lower. Workers don't get that choice. Your paycheck gets taxed immediately. And third, and this one's a massive advantage, is something called the stepped up basis. The way it works is, let's say you invested $100,000 into stocks. Over time, it grows to $10 million. Let's imagine you're holding it most of your life. If you sold it, you'd owe capital gains tax on 9.9 million, roughly 2.3 million in taxes. But if you die and pass that stock to your kids, the value resets to 10 million. All the gains disappear for tax purposes, and your heirs, the people you give the stocks to when you die, they can sell immediately and owe zero capital gains tax. And more than half the value of the largest estates is unrealized capital gains that's never been taxed. And there's one more strategy with this. It's called buy, borrow, die. If wealthy people need cash, they don't sell their assets, they borrow against them. Banks will lend money using stock portfolios as collateral, often at very low interest rates, sometimes even less than inflation. So they get cash to spend without ever selling and without ever triggering capital gains tax. Then, when they die, the stepped up basis wipes out the tax bill entirely. That's how ultra wealthy families legally avoid paying taxes on massive investment gains. And this isn't a loophole, it's how the system is designed. And it's not just that the wealthy own more assets, they own better assets. Most rich households hold their wealth in corporate equity, especially private businesses, and they have access to private markets that can give massive returns on investments, whereas most regular middle income or lower income Americans, they don't have access to these private markets because they don't have enough liquid cash to invest to even participate in them. And when you look at one of the biggest wealth killers for middle and lower class Americans, it's inflation. And wealthy people are able to position themselves in a way where they don't really feel the negative effects of inflation. When the Federal Reserve expands the money supply, we've learned that asset prices tend to go up first. Things like stocks or real estate. But eventually, so do the prices of food, rent, gas, and everyday essentials. But if you're wealthy and you own assets, inflation can benefit you. And you can borrow against that rising value at relatively low interest rates. But if you're a wage earner, inflation works very differently. The purchasing power on your paycheck buys less, your rent increases, your grocery bill rises, and wages usually adjust slower than asset prices. That's why inflation disproportionately affects lower income households. They have to spend a larger share of their income on necessities. And every time the money supply expands aggressively, the Cantillon dynamic repeats. Asset holders benefit first, which are mostly the wealthy, and price levels adjust later. The result isn't a conspiracy, it's a structural effect. When new money flows into financial markets first, the people closest to those markets benefit the most, and over time, that compounds into massive wealth concentration. And now that you understand what actually causes massive wealth gaps, you don't have to be a victim of it. You can take advantage of the same laws and systems that already exist. You can invest into the S&P 500 every month and slowly build a portfolio. You can own assets instead of just holding cash, and you can take advantage of the Cantillon effect when the Fed prints money. And if you own a home, you can pass it to your children when you pass away at extremely low interest rates. It's not about gaming the system, it's about understanding how it works, because once you're informed, you stop falling victim to it and you start positioning yourself on the right side of it so you can make better financial decisions for your future.